So we're going to change some things up in 2026, try to make it more engaging, even and just take it to the next level, always trying to improve. So when I've been looking at infinite banking and, when we've talked about infinite banking and people, what is it misunderstanding or where do people where do people lose their, like the understanding? I had somebody say to me, I really don't understand the grocery store example, right? And it's funny because Nelson would always say, there are certain people this just won't make sense to. Like they just can't get it. And I remember there was a friend and client of mine in South Dakota, and they owned a pharmacy. And I was trying to explain to them infinite banking, but they were kind of had the arrival syndrome, these particular people a little bit, and they thought their investment advisor was like, a great person and that was giving them great advice and, save money, save money. By the way, they later came around but in the beginning, they just couldn't get this concept of why would I want to be my own banker? Like, I just want to get a higher rate of return. I tried to explain to him, like, if you have a headache, what do you do? And he said, well, I go over and grab Tylenol. And I explained to him that there was a profit on that Tylenol, right? And that he 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 just stole the peas. If you understand if you've read Nelson's book, you stole the peas, and it takes a lot to get those peas back. Meaning, in Nelson's example, if there's a 6-cent profit, how many cans of peas do you have to sell to make up for the can that you stole, right? And this didn't make any sense to him. But the reason, and this is back to the topic of how to stop being a slave to interest and debt, is I'm not saying that you wouldn't pay interest, but preferably to yourself. And I'm not saying you wouldn't have debt, but debt on assets, not liabilities, right? Because if we borrow money to buy liabilities, or we pay cash for liabilities, we have lost opportunity costs. If we borrow money for debts, then we're using somebody else's money. We're paying interest. We're paying a volume of interest, which is more important than the interest rate. Nelson does a great job explaining that in his book. But the way to stop being a slave to interest and debt is to control it. Slaves are not in control, right? Only owners are in control. Customers are not in control. Consumers are not in control. Consumers and customers and slaves are dependent or controlled by someone else. So this is going to sound very simple, but remember, simplicity is elusive. The way to stop being a slave to interest and debt is to stop letting somebody else control that function in your life. Don't let somebody else be the banker. Don't let somebody else put you in debt. And I'll give you a perfect example is I have a friend today that is going to go look at a house. And they asked me, hey, will you help me go look at this house? And whether I should buy it or not. And I said, okay, well, tell me a little bit about it. And they told me a little bit about it. And they have a house that is paid for. And it's like, I guess like they would net like say 350,000 for their house. And the new house is say 700,000 or almost 800,000, I think. And so, they're doing the math on what the payments would be, just like a consumer would do, right? But the way that my brain works is you have $350,000 of equity. So if I could take, let's say if it was an $800,000 house and I got to put 20% down, let's just round that to 150 for just a second, is that would leave me about $200,000 to go put into motion. Okay, so if I built an infinite banking system with $200,000 and I did like say $75,000 a year for 3 years or so, and then I saved up money for the additional 25,000 for the third year, and then I could buy cash flowing assets with that, and that would be close to paying for the fourth year premium. Okay, capitalization. I start to say, okay, what would that look like? And I started showing them this of saying, you're going out and putting your money in motion instead of just parking it in equity to lower your payment. putting your money in motion to pay for that liability, which is the home you live in, my house, if you can see in the background, your house, it's a liability, right? It's not making us money and it costs us money. But if I go buy a new house, take the equity from my personal residence and put that into investment real estate, into cash flowing assets, well, not only can I buy a bigger house for me if that's what I wanted to, or I can reduce the cost of what that new house is going to cost me. And so when we started going through this numbers, they were like, wow, that's interesting. So they took it to another level and they found a house that wasn't 800,000, it was like 1.5 million, but it had a in-law suite that is an Airbnb property now, and nets this person about $60,000 a year, not really advertising it very well, according to the person. Okay. So now let's think about that. That's $5,000 a month, but it's better than $5,000 a month because there are tax advantages to renting, to being, having rental property, right? I could do cost segregation. There's a lot of different things I could do to accelerate depreciation, but there are other tax advantages to having that rental property, and it's $5,000 a month cash flow. So what does $5,000 a month get me in a mortgage, right? To pay for the mortgage 100%. So forget about taking my 350 and then having a 400,000 or so dollar mortgage and it's going to cost me 2,500 bucks a month or whatever it is. But could I live in $1.5 million house with this Airbnb property and pay about the same amount? Well, you can, right? So now I kind of blew their world up a little bit because they thought they had this very basic thought thing. And now I'm giving them something complicated because they don't understand it. Then what are they thinking? They're resisting a little bit because it's new, right? But when you're a financial slave and somebody tries to free you, there's a little bit, a piece of you that goes back to the comfort of being the consumer, because the consumer doesn't have to make any investment in the business, to being a slave, being an employee, because then again, the employee doesn't have to make sure that the company makes money to pay the payroll. And consumer, employee, customer, the customer at the bank doesn't have to make a investment in the bank or the business, but that means that you will always be a slave to interest and debt forever. And if you just break away from that and take ownership and control that equation, meaning, like, again, it was kind of funny because they were like, well, I don't know that Airbnb is going to be around in 10 years, or they all of a sudden they were putting up obstacles and roadblocks that really aren't even there. I mean, you know, I mean, I'd be thinking, well, maybe I could rent this more efficiently and I could make $80,000 a year. I mean, why are we always thinking the negative? And we talk about the strangest secret and Earl Nightingale and whatever you think about, you become. But our brains want to go back the other way and be like, well, what happens if this fails or that fails or this fails or that fails? And I think about it, and I'll kind of wrap this up. And again, I really apologize for this being late, but I hope this is a simple but I think powerful message today about not being a slave to interest and debt, and it's about control. But I remember when I was 22, 23, and I was living in no, I must have been like 22 because actually I remember my wife was pregnant. And so we were going to rent this house, right? In Colorado. We'd just gotten to Colorado and we had a baby, and we were thinking there was another one on the way, which there was. And so we go to rent this house in and they call it Louisville, Colorado, not Louisville. And in Louisville, Colorado, which is by Boulder, we go to look at this house, and I pull up to the house and we're supposed to meet the owner there. And the only person that I see is like this long haired hippie, long beard, scraggly jeans, holy t shirt, and he's painting. And I'm like, hey, you know where the owner is? He goes, oh, yeah, I'm the owner. And I was like, oh, okay, cool. And again, we're in Boulder. I mean, I grew up in California. I'm not surprised by anything like that. It's like, okay, this guy's his own dude, right? That's cool. So the more and more that I talk to this guy, he owns real estate all over Boulder County, and he loves to work on the real estate himself. That's like cathartic for him, right? So I think, man, I'm young. I don't remember if I made the decision to get into the financial services business yet or not, but I was really close. But I said to him, like, man, how did you do all of this? And like, man, it seems so risky and everything else. Like, how did you become a landlord and buy these properties? And, like sometimes it seems like, like, weren't you afraid you were gonna fail or something? I don't remember the question, but the answer I remember like it was yesterday. He said, Jim, if you're on the one side of a creek and on your side of the creek, um, it's brown, it's kind of, there's a lot of sticker bushes and just it's not a great place to be. But on the other side of the creek is everything that you want. There's fruit trees and green grass and sunshine and everything is green and beautiful. So you want to get to that side of the creek, but you're afraid to jump in the creek because you're afraid you'll drown. And he said, here's the secret. You won't let yourself drown. I mean, I know that's simple. He's like, yeah, you're going to get in the creek. Yeah, it's going to be cold. And yeah, there might be rushing water. And yeah, you might struggle, but you're going to figure out how to get to the other side. And he said, that's the trick. Jump in the creek. I've never forgotten that in almost 40 years. Not quite 40 years, thank goodness. No, I don't care how old I am. And so that's what I would say today is the lesson is the way that you stop becoming a slave to interest is in debt is you take control of it. And the way that you overcome that fear is to know you're not going to let yourself drown. So thank you all for being here. And thank you all for being loyal members of the community. We're going to make it great because we've got big ideas and big plans, and you guys are all going to be part of it. And we're here to serve you and to create value. So thank you all for being here. Yeah, today's lesson, don't be afraid to jump in the creek. You will not let yourself drown, I promise. And if it, like again, you guys on here, if you have a individual situation, call me. I'll be happy to help. And all right. So thank you all. Godspeed. We'll see you next week.